There's three things around time I want to talk about first. The first one is this concept called Parkinson's Law. And you can see here on the screen, by definition, Parkinson's Law says that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. Now, in everyday terms, here's what that means. If you have a project that you have to get done and the person says, I'd like to have it in 6 weeks, the average human being who's not focused on optimizing their time will fully utilize those 6 weeks to get the job done. And what's interesting is if that person said, maybe it's your supervisor or maybe it's a client that you're doing work for, and that individual says, I'd love to have it in 3 weeks. If you take on the responsibility of doing the task, magically, we can find a way to get it done in 3 weeks. So we will fill up whatever amount of time we're given. It's a bit like the same way we can fill up a closet with, however much closet space we have, we tend to do that. We seem to be uncomfortable with empty space and white space. So one of the challenges and responsibilities when you want to get really good at your productivity skills is to really look at this thing called time. And time is a very abstract concept. We all have a different interpretation of what 15 minutes means. Someone comes by your office and they say, do you have a minute? Well, they don't really mean a minute. Depending on who the individual is, we will sometimes unconsciously go, or in our own heads go, okay, this is going to be 15 minutes, or this is going to be a 3-minute chat. So we have this abstract concept of time. We have this thing called Parkinson's Law. And then we also have this dynamic that is happening in the workplace, which is the cost of interruptions. Some of the and I'd love to talk about this. And for some of you that are on the webinar with us this morning and been a client of mine or in one of my sessions, I'll look for any opportunity to talk about this. This is real recent research on the North American workplace. And what the research at the end of the day, sort of in a nutshell, what it concluded was that at work, when we are interrupted, and an interruption can be a customer comes in and wants to see you, a staff person needs to ask you questions, someone pops by your workspace and sits down in a chair and says, can I talk to you about something for a minute? It can be an email that you get a notification, you see it coming across your screen and you realize, I've got to at least read it and then maybe I've got to respond to it. So any of those kinds of interruptions, an interruption is an interruption. Every time we're interrupted, for most people, it takes you an average of 17 to 25 minutes after you have dealt with the interruption to fully recover from the interruption. And if you think about it, most of us will come back to the task that we're working on. We find where we left off, and then we have to back up 2 or 3 steps and come back through and move our way forward, and then we land where we are. And it still takes some time to get back into the rhythm, especially if you're doing something that's dealing with numbers or design work, or you're trying to be creative. It's really difficult to get back into that rhythm when you're interrupted. So 17 to 25 minutes to recover from an interruption. And then here's part 2. The research clearly showed that for the average working person today, we are interrupted every 11 minutes. So if you think about that, I always say that's the reason why we go home from work or we close our home office door at the end of the day and we say to someone in our family, oh my gosh, I never stopped today. I'm absolutely worn out. I am exhausted. And yet I don't know what I got accomplished. It's because of the fact that we don't have boundaries around our time and we are being negatively impacted by all of these interruptions. So we've got Parkinson's Law. We've got loose boundaries, which welcomes lots of interruptions. And then we have this concept where we have been sold a raw bill of goods. And the raw bill of goods was that we were told you got to develop the skill to be a multitasker. And when you ask the question, which is better, to be a multitasker or what they call being a unitasker or a single tasker or being laser focused today, the answer clearly is that being able to unitask is much more effective. And unitasking reduces our multitasking reduces our productivity by 40%. And the Harvard Business Review, I've quoted them here, they actually concluded that when we're multitasking, we're not actually multitasking. All that we're doing is switching from one task to another and actually interrupting our productivity. And so when you go back to what I just said about the cost of interruptions, it's like this mad circle that we find ourselves in. These are some of the reasons why, at the end of the day, we are worn out and we still feel that although you never stopped all day, you actually haven't accomplished anything. So when we talk about productivity strategies, what we're looking at is how can we be in control of our time rather than letting other people, because all those other things are actually allows other people to be in control of our time. So I have 10 specific strategies. And as I said at the beginning, I want you to look for at least one of these strategies that you're able to implement, or look for one that you can add to something that you're already doing. And I want to start right here. My number one strategy is something that I've been doing for a very long time, which is the night before. One of the last things that I do at the end of my workday, and I'll talk about how I end my workday later, that's going to be strategy number 10. I look at the next day and I decide what are the top 3 things I absolutely need to get done. And they don't always have to be big things. Sometimes responding to a particular person's email is going to be critically important. And I will say that is the toppermost of the poppermost. And it could be that I'm going to do that. I'm going to work on a project for a client. And I also need to update something on my website because I have been needing to do that for 4 days. And I'm saying tomorrow is going to be the day. The way that I look at these top 3 is this. If I get nothing else done today, I've identified my top 3 for today, I will feel really good about the day. And if I get other stuff done, that's just a bonus. And I, in fact, don't even like to have a visual to-do list. I use one that's on my computer, and it also syncs with my phone, so I can add to it when I'm on the go, because I don't like the idea. I love to-do lists, but I don't like the idea of seeing that list in front of me because it never goes away. And if I highlight that I've got something done, or I cross it off, or in my case, I go into my app and I delete it, I'm inevitably going to be adding 2 or 3 or 4 things to that. It's a bit like that inbox of life that's never empty. So I like to focus on what I do is I take a Post-it note, put the Post-it note on my computer, because these days, because I'm living in my home office, and I know that those are the absolute 3 things that I'm going to get done. And I'll show you, I've already built it into my schedule for the day as well, but I keep that at the forefront. So top 3 things you have to get done. And as I said, if you get nothing else done, you'll feel really good about that. You'll say, I was productive in that way. Okay, then strategy number 2 is this classic time management principle called time blocking. Now, for people who time block, clearly it shows that when you do it and do it well and you do it consistently, it will increase your productivity by 80%. So if I can get that kind of a return on some strategy that I can work with, I don't know if you're like me, but I'm absolutely in. And I love to use time blocking. I actually don't think I could run my business if I didn't time block. So 3 fundamental things that you do with time blocking. Number 1, you start with your high-level priorities. Well, guess what? They're always going to be those 3 things that you have identified the night before. I'll actually, I can, not to jump ahead of myself, but I can loosely plan my schedule for the week. I know the fundamental things I have to get done, but I like to then do my time blocking the night before as a part of this process. So I'm layering in my top 3 priorities. It's also important in your time blocking for each day that you have bookends, and we call those your startup routine and your shutdown routine. And I'm going to talk about those as 2 separate strategies in just a little bit. So you have your bookends, and then in the middle of those 2 bookends, your startup and your shutdown routine, you're going to, the first thing you're going to do is layer in your top 3 priorities. And then you fill the other time, blocks of time around that based on themes of tasks. And I'll talk about that in a second. So here's the thing about time blocking. The purists, and I'm almost a purist, the purist will block 24 hours of their time. They will block everything in, and I'm pretty darn close to that. I'm going to show you. This is an example. I actually created this template on Canva because I couldn't find one that I liked, and it's my day, my way. And if you see here, everything is built. These are in between these white areas, that's a half-hour interval. I just didn't want to put 9:30 in there because it clutters it up. But right now, I'm starting my day every day, unless I'm teaching. When I teach, I start at 8:30, but when I'm not teaching, I start at 9 o'clock. And you can see I have built in here, this is my startup routine here. This is my shutdown routine. Now I have a longer day by choice. But here's the thing about time blocking. It's not just blocking in work-related things. I allocate the time in the daytime. I love to have lunch in the middle of the day with my husband. It's been one of the gifts of being at home and in self-isolation, is that I get to do that just about every day. I have time here for my own reading. If I don't schedule time, I'm not going to get my reading done. And sometimes this is business-related reading. Lots of times it's just personal reading that I like to do, but I love to have time to be able to read. I typically have Taco at daycare multiple days a week. So that's my time frame to go pick him up from daycare. When we come back, before we get into dinner, if I don't get a walk in before dinner, I have learned that the walk ain't gonna happen. So I put time in for that. I put time in for dinner. I actually put time in for watching television. There's some people who break down, they do their time blocking in 15-minute intervals. I'm good with half-hour intervals for the most part for myself, but that is what you do. And so it allows you, if you say, I want to have more time for crafting, or I want to be able to pick up the phone and call my mother, and I know that that's going to take a half hour, we layer it in. You see, when I said time is an abstract concept for people, so many individuals say to me, yeah, well, I just call and I'll chat with mom. That'll just take a minute. Well, 40 minutes later, they're still on the phone, which is great. But then if you were planning on doing 2 other things, then you're frustrated because you think, oh, goodness gracious, I was going to do X and X and I can only, or X and Y, and I can only get X done. So time blocking, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. Now, I also said in this step number 3, so I've got my bookends, put in my high-level priorities, that I block my time based on themes. And how I've created it for myself is I work with 3 themes. In my schedule, in the run of a week, I need to make sure that I have a certain percentage of my time which is working in my business. And for me, working in my business is whenever I'm either with clients or with students, like this, doing this webinar this morning, or when I'm working on a project or a client file. So all of that is, I'm not working on my own business, I'm working on something for my client. So I make sure that I've figured it out for myself, what percentage of my time is going to be related to working in my business. But here's the one that so many business people, because they're so busy working in their business, they never allocate time to work on their business. So for me, on this particular day, from 3 to 4 o'clock, I have a social media master that I like to keep updated, and I have allocated a chunk of time to do work with respect to that. And I have estimated that it's going to take me up to an hour. That is something that I get to do for me, meaning I get to do it for my own business, and I love to be able to do that. And then of course, you've got to have me time. So that's being able to go for a walk. Having dinner is me time. Picking up Taco from daycare is me time. Any of those things, watching television is another part of me time. So it's a good way to be able to look at your schedule. I remember when I first started to do this, I used to get 3 different color highlighters, and I would visually highlight the blocks of time that I had dedicated to each of those, because I'm a very visual person, so I could sort of look at 7 days on pieces of paper and get a feel for whether or not I felt that that was appropriate. So strategy number 2 is time blocking.
Debbie, we have a
Yeah.
question
Yes.
from Carrie.
Yes.
Is there an online place where teams can see each other's time block? I'm thinking this would reduce interruptions and also keep people accountable.
Well, I would think if you're doing any kind of a shared calendar, they should be able to see that. And I'm not sure if you're using Slack. Slack is a really great app for internal team communication. In fact, I've not used Slack very much myself because I don't have this huge team, but I've had clients who use it and they don't even use email anymore, and they put everything in Slack. And I got a feeling, maybe if somebody on the webinar, if they're using Slack, might know the answer to that question. But I could certainly, Carrie, we could have a poke around for that. That's a great question. But yes, that principle, if people know that you're working on blocks of time, and if you train your staff and each other to go before you want to interrupt somebody and check their schedule to see if they're working in a time block, that would be really helpful, because that feeds into strategy number 3, which is batching. So if you look at my schedule, the concept of batching says you take a block of time. So I'll come back here from 10 to 11 in the morning. I am reviewing my notes for my classes. I'm reviewing them for multiple classes that I'm doing. So you do a like-minded tasks all at one time. You may say, I'm going to go and check all my social media notifications, and I'm going to check it on all of my social media platforms, and you will batch that in time. So a batch can be a half hour. A batch is not defined so much by time as it is that you're doing many like-minded tasks all at one time. A really good example, in fact, is accounting, because for many of us, in order to do our accounting or do our bookkeeping, we've got to open up the app, you got to get your posted stamp out for user, you got to make sure you have a red pen, you got to get certain forms together. It's a bit of a ritual, at least it is for me, to get all my stuff together. So it's not something I can flip in and out of easily. So I like to batch that all together. So if I'm doing payables, I'm doing all my payables. If I'm doing receivables, I'm doing all of my receivables, as opposed to saying, oh, who should I invoice today? I'm going to take an hour on Friday morning and I'll keep a running note of everybody I have to invoice. I'm going to sit for that hour or that hour and a half and do all of my invoicing. But strategy number 4 is a big first cousin of strategy number 3, which is mega batching. So mega batching goes hand in hand with using big blocks of time to actually sit and be laser focused on something. So I do my accounting in 2 big batches. They're about 6-hour cycles. 2 days out of the month, I do them back to back. And I'll often do them on a Friday and a Saturday, or a Sunday and a Monday, depending on my schedule. I like to work on, when it comes to something like my accounting, I like it when the rest of the world is asleep, meaning nobody's expecting me to respond on a Sunday afternoon. So if I've got that block of time, I will do bigger periods of time. When I'm doing program design, for example, in this block here, I'm spending 2.5 hours. Basically, after I do my startup routine, I'm dedicating my whole morning. This would be when I am developing curriculum, and I will have a specific topic, and I will go sort of in terms of where I am in my head and in my space. It's like I'm on lockdown and I'm totally focused on developing that. So for example, when I was developing the content and the PowerPoint for our webinar this morning, that was a mega batch. I allocated 3 or 4 hours of time, and I basically shut the world down, and I am laser. Actually, I will tell you when I did this. I did this on Sunday night, and I had a check-in group on Sunday night, and we don't normally meet on Sunday night. We thought that we would, and I completely forgot about them because I was so engrossed in my mega batch. So that's a really, really, really good strategy. I have been, I've launched a podcast, and I have been mega batching podcasting. So when I'm writing and developing my podcasts, I will mega batch that. When I am recording my podcasts, I will mega batch that. It's a really good way of making sure that you're optimizing your time. So that's strategy number 4. Let's move on to strategy number 5. Strategy number 5, and this is really important right now for those of us who are working from home, and we typically don't work from home. But I'd also say this to people who typically work from home and haven't done this. You need to have a dedicated workspace. And it needs to be in a situation where you have an appropriate work surface, because it's not like you've just brought some work home, you're doing some project and you're working a little extra overtime, and so you'll sit at the dining room table. The dining room table, as people have discovered, is not working. You need to have the right surface. You need to have a chair, an ergonomic chair that's going to be appropriate for you. You need to have good lighting. For me, I don't like to have a lot of clutter around, but I also need to have the essential tools that I need. So I need to make sure that I've got my scissors and my highlighter and a stapler that's close to me so that I can be really efficient when I'm doing my work. You also want to make sure that aesthetically you love that space, even if it's like this one here, that lime-ish color chair in the corner of a room. The individual has taken time to put some things on the wall. I think there's an inspirational quote there, and just visually it would be nice to see. I like to have greenery. You see over my shoulder, I have my green plant. I have another green plant on the other side of me. You want to have a space that feels encouraging and that you can feel creative in. Now, this is not always possible, but especially if you're working from home and you have other people around, particularly if you have young children around and there's noise and they're watching television and they're in the kitchen, that's really, really hard to be productive in that way. And in some cases, we have no other choice, and I feel for you. But if you can find a spot in your house where you can close the door, even if it means for now, while we are going through this global pandemic, that you have to convert a corner of your bedroom. I had heard from one person who's part of my Facebook community who sent me a private message, and she said, Deborah, I just want you to know, I had a large closet, and I cleared out the closet and I stored all the stuff in the corner of the basement, and I'm working in my closet, and there are times that I have to close the closet door and I'm tucked away there. So that's just being innovative and doing what it is that you have to do. But if you can find any way where you can close a door, that is going to be helpful. But you need to have your own dedicated space. And the other reason why you need your own dedicated space is that you need to be able to walk away from that space at the end of the day. If it's a situation where you're working on the island in the kitchen, as I said, or the dining room table, some people are working on the coffee table in the middle of the family room, your stuff is all over the place and it's in front of you. You never get away from it. Plus, I would have a lot of concern about potentially losing some information or individuals seeing work-related material, particularly if you have clients or you're dealing with financial things that, quite frankly, they should not be seeing. So for confidentiality reasons, it's important to think about that as well. So after our webinar today, just at some point, step back, particularly if you're working from home in a space that you have created under the circumstances of the self-isolation, and say, is that the best place? And walk around your space. You never know where you might find a better nook or cranny that would help you optimize your focus. And then that's going to help you be more productive. All right, strategy number 6. So strategy number 6 is one of the bookends, and it's creating a startup routine. I am a huge proponent of the importance of creating good habits. And the startup routine, which is different than for me, I have a morning routine plus I have a startup routine. I'm not going to talk about the morning routine, but you get the spirit of it in the startup routine. A long time ago, I was gifted Stephen King's book called On Writing. And if anybody's interested in writing at all, it's a beautiful read. And one of the things that fascinated me was he talked about how in order to have the kind of success and to produce what the volume of writing that he produces every day, he discovered very early in his career that he needed to have a startup routine. So, and he describes it in great detail in his book, but in essence, when he gets up in the morning and after he has his breakfast, he takes his dog, and I think he takes a stick and he goes, because he lives on this property, this beautiful wooded property. He has a path, a hike that he takes. And he said, in essence, it's a path because I walk the exact same path every single day. So that's one of the keys to a routine. You have to do the exact thing in the exact order all the time. And it's like it creates a track in your mind and in how you approach things. So he would walk the exact same path. He said, oh, practically at the same pace. And he would pause at the same river for about the same period of time. And he would eventually find his way back. He had created, I imagine it like a cabin on his property, as this writing cottage. And he would go in, his dog would get settled, he'd give the dog a treat, he'd start a fire, he'd make a pot of tea, and he would sit in front. In those days, I don't know if he does it differently now, but he would work on a typewriter. And he said, I knew I was getting at the end of my routine, the thing that he did every single day, when he would sit in his chair. And he said it was like, as he poured his cup of tea, his brain and his fingers and his body got into writing mode. He put a piece of paper in his typewriter and he would begin the process. And then he said he would go into a rhythm for some period of time. So when I enter my home office, now I'm very lucky because I've always had a home office. So I do have the luxury, and I see it as a luxury, of being able to come in and close the door. I'm in a space that's dedicated to my work, and everything that I need is located right here in this space. But when I sit, so my routine is that I make coffee, all know my famous French press. So I bring my coffee with me. When I sit at my desk, I have my iPad next to me, and for some reason I like to do some of these things on my iPad. I like to check the weather. I then look at CNN headline news, and I'm just glancing at the headlines. I don't let myself open up and get into the weeds of it, because I know that that'll send me down a rabbit hole. But I want to sort of see what the pulse of the world is in this moment. I check CBC News headlines, and then I go to my social media notifications. And I want to have a look at all of those, respond to anything. I start at Facebook. I then always go to LinkedIn, and then I go to Instagram. And when that's all done, I then check my email. And I'm looking at, I prioritize, I deal with whatever I can in that period of time. And I also check my phone. All of that, I don't allow it to take any more than 45 minutes. But I know I also have 45 minutes that I can get those things done. And I do it in that order. So in my office with my coffee, checking the weather, CNN comes first, then goes CBC, then I have my pattern, my social media notifications, and so on. And that somehow gets my head into work mode. It's like, I've now officially started my day. And I'm sort of in that headspace. So I'm a huge proponent of encouraging you to have a startup routine that you can identify. And here's what I would encourage you to do. For the next couple of weeks, if you really wanted, or you were up for this challenge, record how you're spending all of your time. And if you're looking to develop a startup routine, look at the things that you typically will do to get your day going, and look at how much time they are taking and what you would like for them to take. It'll take some time to figure it out. But once you get into the rhythm of it, it's very easy to follow. And there's a concept called habit stacking. And that's really what we're doing, is here's how habit stacking works in a nutshell. You have anchors, so you have the start of the stack. We would call a startup routine a whole stack. So the start of the stack for me is having my coffee and sitting at my desk. And then it's the next thing that you do, which for me is checking the weather. And it's right there on my iPad, which then triggers, I just know, like, that habit leads to CNN, and then that habit leads to CBC, and that habit leads me to Facebook. And even within my Facebook, I check my notifications first. And then I deal with any requests that I have for people who want to be friends on my personal page, because I get tons of those in the run of a day. And I do so many of those. And then that leads me to LinkedIn. And then in LinkedIn, I go into my notifications and I go into my messages. Like there's a pattern for everything that you do. And then I'm very conscious, and I don't let it take any more than 45 minutes. And if I don't get it done in 45, I promise you, I know it'll all be waiting for me when I get around to coming back to check on that in the middle of the day. So that's the startup routine, strategy number 6. Strategy number 7. I love to talk about strategy number 7. So strategy number 7 is, okay, it's really important in the run of a day, particularly if you suffer from what I suffer from, which is this. I can sit down, and when I get in, say, into a mega block, I forget to move, and it's really unhealthy for my body. In fact, one of the concerns that has arisen with everybody working from home and being much more sedentary because of this self-isolation is that it's actually not good for our bodies. So it is important to build in little breaks, but not big breaks, because big breaks break your concentration. And the classic technique that I love to talk about is called the Pomodoro method. And Pomodoro is the Italian word for tomato. And it was born out when the person created it, they were inspired by the classic kitchen timer. That was shaped like a tomato. It's a classic Italian kitchen timer. And so they were inspired to call the technique the Pomodoro technique. And the way that it works is that you work in cycles of 30 minutes, and the 30-minute cycle is broken down by 25 minutes of production based on whatever you have time blocked and batched or mega batched for that. And then at the end of the 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break. And then you start another cycle, another 30-minute cycle. So you work for another 25 minutes. And when you take that 5-minute break, we were talking about this in one of my classes yesterday, and somebody said, so does that mean I can check my email? And my response to that was, no, this is the kind of break where you're supposed to stand up. You can go to the washroom, stretch a little. We were doing a break from our class yesterday, and I went and just stood out on my back deck because it was such a beautiful day, and just stood there for a couple of minutes and soaked in a couple of the rays of the sun before we had to come back in. So you do those cycles of 30 minutes, 25 minutes of work, 5-minute break. And after you do 4 cycles, so this is over a 2-hour period. So you're doing 25 minutes, 5-minute break, 25 minutes, 5-minute break, 25 minutes, 5-minute break. Then when you do the last 25 minutes, you actually earn yourself a 20-minute break. And that's when, I mean, it's yours to spend however you want, but that's when you get to go and have a much bigger break, and you can do whatever it is that you like to do. The Pomodoro method uses, I've got a picture of it right here, a time timer, but I also have my time timer here. And my time timer, this is the way that it works. I just want to, there I go. I want to make sure you can see it. There's my time timer. So here's what I love about it. And this particular one has numbers on it, but you can also get them where it's just a blank sheet. And you can, if you were working with yourself and you said at the end of this cycle, I'm going to get to have a break and I'm going to go have a snack, then you can put a sticker or something, a visual of a snack or the word snack there. So visually that can be a motivator for you. It's a really good tool to use with children when you're trying to help them improve their attention and be productive as well. But here's what I love about Pomodoro, about the time timer, that if I said I'm going to work in a cycle of 25 minutes, it's really visual. Remember I said I'm a visual person? And so I can put it on my desk, and I know that I'm sitting here working on this task. So I'm trying to get, I'm doing whatever, doesn't matter, whatever it is I'm doing, when I glance up, I can see visually how much time I have left. And it's really exciting when you're doing something. You know, when they say, if you have a task that you have to do and you really don't want to do it, you should do it first thing in the morning. They call it eating the frog. Well, if I'm eating a frog, I'm glancing at the time timer and saying, how much longer do I have to go to get this thing done? And so at the very end of it then, I turn the sound off, but it does 3 beeps to let you know that you're at the end of that cycle. And then what I've had to learn to do is, if I'm going to take a break, I then put my timer back on for my 5-minute break. Because if I don't, it's amazing how quickly 5 minutes will go by. So I don't go very far from my office when I take my 5-minute breaks. I've learned that. But these come in all sizes. I have a wall size. I have a small carry one, one that I could toss in a piece of luggage and carry somewhere. I could use it in a meeting if I wanted to. I've become a huge fan of these, and the question then becomes, where do I get one of these? This one here, I got this one on Amazon, and it was about $50. But the newest ones that I got, I'm really happy to say that Health Walks in New Glasgow and here in Truro, Carrie Fleming, who's the owner, and Carrie's on the webinar with us this morning. She spent 25 years as an occupational therapist and used this as a tool. And so she had an inventory of these that Carrie did a wonderful Facebook Live about these. I've talked about them at Wisdom Table Talks. I talk about them in my teaching. And as long as her inventory lasts, I'm really happy to say that you do not have to wait now 6 weeks to try to get something from somewhere else. You can support a local business. If you're looking to get one of those, that's where you would get it. But I love it as a principle. I use my time timer a whole lot. I actually, when I originally bought this particular one, I was teaching a public speaking course, and it was to help the participants know if they had to do a 10-minute presentation, they could glance down and visually see, how much time they had left for their presentation. So there's all kinds of tools that you can use it for. And of course, it would be great in the kitchen as well for your cooking. But anyway, so that's the Pomodoro method. I'm a huge, huge, huge fan, and I've gotten very creative with it. So that's strategy number 7.
Debbie, we have a question from Karen.
Yeah.
This is going back to another strategy. Previous. When you work shift work and your schedule changes day, is there ways you can adjust this? For example, my business work could be 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. or could start after a retail shift. So start at 8 or 9 p.m. So this is in reference to the blocking, she says.
Okay, so immediately what comes to mind, and I actually work with a client around this, we created for her a standard way to block her day when she was working in the daytime, and it was slightly different when it was a nighttime one. And then she would just switch one out for the other, because in her case, she did some very, very common things through her workday, which most of us do. So you could actually you potentially could create a week where hopefully you're doing your shift work where maybe it's 4 or 5 days on one shift and so many days off. You would build them so then you could pull out whatever version of your weekly shift you were working with there. And maybe, Karen, you can give us some indication if that created some clarity for you, or if you have a follow-up question with respect to that. That's probably the best way to approach it. Okay, I'll move on to strategy number 8. And strategy number 8 is about taming distractions. And I know that this has been a big challenge, particularly for those of you that have other people at home, not just children, but other people in your space. Someone was sharing yesterday, because we were talking about this, that normally they work from home by themselves, and now they're working from home with a husband and children at home, and it really has had its challenges. And also just for your own self. So these are some of the strategies or tips that I give around taming distractions. 1, turn off the television. and turn off the news. The news cycle can be very, very distracting. Just like I'm not checking the news cycle all day long. It is not healthy. It's not productive. It's not helping me. And I promise you, any of the 24-hour news channels, they're repeating that not just every half hour, but sometimes every 5 minutes within every half hour. It's not like you're going to miss out on anything. So I would turn that off. In fact, I sort of look at, if I were in an office, I would not be watching the Rachel Ray show while I'm working on a client file. So I don't do that sort of thing, even though I'm in a home office and nobody has any idea what I have around me that might I might be part of what's going on in my office. So turn those things off. It's also very helpful to wear noise reduction headphones. A number of people have given me feedback around this one over the last 6 or 7 weeks, because I've been sharing that with a number of my clients and they have found it really helpful. I also silence my phone. Now, when I silence my phone, I am silencing it, plus I'm putting it on do not disturb. I don't even leave the vibrate on when I'm working in a batch of something, because the vibration I find is just as distracting as if the phone were to ring anyway. And if I don't want to be interrupted, then that's something that I have discovered that I need to do. I turn off notifications. I'm here right now, notifications are off on my phone, they're off on my iPad. I've programmed them to be off on my computer, because I find that constant scroll of an email coming in or a Facebook post or something that's happening on YouTube, that is really, not only is it distracting, but it's very tempting. So turn them off, and then you can turn them back on at other times. If you have a door and you can close it, close it. I happen to live with somebody who gets that when that door is closed, that he doesn't come in unless the house is burning down. If I'm say doing like this webinar, I've put tacos at home with me today, but I've put him, he's sitting out in his crate in the car because I didn't want him to be barking or be a disruption. It's one of the reasons why I take him to daycare. When I'm trying to get work done, he can sometimes be very demanding and he's a disruption. So I've had to build that into my schedule. I will sometimes put a ribbon on the door handle, which says, is a signal that is, you can check with me. In this case, in our household, you can check with me if you want to ask me something. So that typically means I'm in a mega batch, I'm working on something, but I wouldn't mind being interrupted, but only occasionally. And then the importance of asking others for what it is that you need. So sometimes I'll say to David, can you please turn the volume down on the television because it's a distraction? Or can you use your headset to listen to the television if you want to have it louder, because I'm finding it challenging trying to do whatever it is that I'm trying to do, and I'm listening to that, or if he's listening to music or something like that. In other words, you need to be communicating with the people in your household and ask for what it is that you need. Plus, strategy number 9, this is a great family activity, is to establish the rules of work, particularly the rules of work when you're at home now. But when you go back to your office, or for some of you that are in an office space and you might be working with other people, or when we go back to our new normal and you've got your team back with you, it's a great exercise to do as part of a staff meeting, is to establish your rules of work. And so here are some examples of rules of work. This number 1 is one of mine, that I arrive at my home office every day dressed as if I could be asked to jump on a Zoom call or I have to do a Facebook Live. So I'm conscious of that, and just dressing for work and doing my hair and putting my makeup on just puts me in that mindset. I feel more professional than if I were to show up at my desk every day in my PJs. Other examples, never interrupt me when I'm on the phone. If the door is closed, knock first, or if the door is closed and the purple ribbon's on the doorknob, only knock if the house is burning down or you need to call an ambulance. Number 5, when I leave the office at the end of the day and close my door, my walk down the hallway, this one is mine as well. My walk down the hallway is my commute home. And it's my way. I actually say, okay, this is like my commute home, so that I don't have the guilt of feeling like, well, my work is just a step away and it's so much easier to come back to it, because overworking is unhealthy for you either. And I don't blare music in my office or watch Netflix while I'm working, because I wouldn't do that in my normal office. So just think about what your own rules of work would be. If it's in the case of a family, it's a good thing to put on the refrigerator. It might be, if you have a door, it could be your bedroom door that you're using part of your bedroom temporarily for your office. It could be good to put them on the outside of the door, and even to put them near yourself so that you can be reminded of what it was that you committed to. And of course, they're always open for change. And then strategy number 10.
Debbie, can I interrupt with
Yes.
Sam has a question?
Yes.
Before you move to number 10. Sam says, how do you suggest turning off social media, that is, ignoring newsfeed distractions, when you work in social media for yourself and other clients? So I can see that would be challenging.
Yes, so what I found helpful, Sam, is I don't look at the feed. I live in my notification section. That's the only place that I'm going to go and deal with those things, because it's when I go to my feed that I go down the rabbit trail. Just like I said, even when I check the headlines for CBC News, I don't open it up and get into reading it, because that just leads somewhere else. So that, anyway, just to go back to the social media, I just work in the notifications. So I look at my notifications, I'll click on it, I'll go and I'll deal with that, and I'll come back to the next notification. And when those notifications are all done, I get out of Facebook. Or when I have looked at all of the, excuse me, the comments on my Instagram feed, I then exit. I don't do the scrolling. And it's just, you have to be disciplined and hold yourself back. So strategy number 10 is to create a shutdown routine. So very similar to the startup routine, I have a routine for my shutdown. Now, I do similar things. I am checking. I don't I don't check the headline news, because I'm at the end of my day, but I'm checking all of my notifications. So I'm doing my social media check-in once again. I'm also checking my phone, because sometimes where I've got my phone silenced, you don't realize that there's been a call for you, and you can deal with it then, or you could deal with it the next day. It's very rare that it's going to be something that you absolutely should have dealt with, unless you're expecting a phone call or something. So I do my social media, I check my phone, and then I check all of my email notifications, the emails that have come in, and I deal with whatever it is that I need to deal with. And I try to do that in a half-hour period of time, because so my total shutdown routine is 45 minutes. The last 15 minutes, once I've sort of taken care of all of those things, now I go into the mode of getting myself in the right mindset for preparing for the next day. So that's when I'm looking at what's coming up tomorrow, and I am finessing my time blocking, and I'm identifying the top 3 priorities I'm going to work on for the next day. And then based on all of that, if I'm working with a client, I'm pulling my client files, I'm laying everything out on my desk. If I'm going to be teaching and I need to have some tool that I'm going to be demonstrating with, or whatever, if I'm going to be talking about my time timer, or just whatever tools I'm going to need, whatever files I'm going to need, I make sure I have all of those. I will even go, and if I'm teaching the next morning, for example, I will bring up all of my PowerPoints and minimize them, so I have everything loaded in, ready to go on my screen. And if I need to, I'll leave a Post-it note on my desk if there's something that I immediately need to bring to my attention and do the next day, so that I have finished my day. And I'm looking, as part of my planning, as I'm looking at that day and going, is there anything that for some reason, because life happens, I didn't get to, I'm going to circle that on today's planner and look to see if I can accommodate that the next day or potentially another day. So it takes me about 15 minutes to do those things, and then I am done for the day. And for me, that tends to end later. I like to go have dinner and then come back and do my shutdown much later at night. That's just my personal choice. And then the rest of the night is mine. And I can choose to do whatever it is that I want to do. So in total, those are 10 strategies that you can cherry pick from to say, is there something here? Is there a couple of these things? You know, if you're like superstar and you're overachiever and you want to try them all, I think you would find that you are much more focused and much more productive. And so I'm going to ask that question of Tracy. I'm going to stop our share, Tracy. I want to bring you back in because I know that over the last number of weeks, you have been Miss Productivity Superstar, right?
Yes. So it started when I listened to Debbie's podcast. I'm not sure what number, maybe 7 and 8 now, regarding picking the 3 things.
Yeah, 6 and 8.
6 and 8.
Yes, the Leader School podcast. Yeah.
Yes. And so I started with picking the 3 things.
Yeah.
And then I had heard batching your time previous. So again, she spoke to it in her podcast. And it just resonated with me. And working from home, I do not have young children working from home. I have a dedicated workspace, but I was still being easily distracted by different emails, checking my emails all the time and everything. So the first week, I just started with working with batching my time. And it wasn't perfect the first week, and it's still being readjusted. Yeah. And I started just setting my emails. I turned off my email notifications and I only check my emails about 4 times a day now. That is it. Not every time an email comes in. And I found it huge. And I just keep layering on new strategies. And I'm feeling so productive. Sometimes seeing all this, doing it all at once is overwhelming.
Yeah.
I just recommend, it worked for me just to try, okay, this week I'm going to focus on these couple of things. And then the following week I add in another, and maybe it's every 2 weeks you add something new. Yeah. But I found a huge difference in implementing these strategies.
Yeah.
I already had a startup routine because I'm a creature of habit and I love doing the same things. And when we started working at home, when the pandemic hit, I kept with my routine.
Yeah.
I got up, I did my yoga, I had my cup of coffee, I journaled, then I showered and got ready for work. So I had all those things, and it really helped.
That's what we call a morning routine.
That's my morning routine. Yeah.
And that springboards you into your startup routine then for your workday. Yeah.
Yes. So don't be overwhelmed. My advice is don't be overwhelmed. Just pick what resonates with you and start implementing those things. Give them a try. My batch timing doesn't look like Debbie's, but it works for me. Yeah. And I keep adjusting it as I go along.
Yeah. Yes. And when I say if you want to be a superstar, I'm saying try all the strategies over some period of time. Do not go and try them all. Actually, it's a bit like a buffet. Like if you go and eat all the food all at one time on your plate, nothing tastes good. So you're right, Tracy. Do one thing and move forward from there. Yeah. Any other questions that came in, Tracy?
No, not. Okay. There was no other questions.
Okay.
So I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning, and I hope you found it helpful, and I think you will. I found all the strategies helpful. Please follow us on Facebook and our webinars. We're offering a series of webinars, and they can be found on our website, on our social media. And I want to thank Debbie. Debbie, thank you so much for sharing these. One day I was just like, my Friday, I was like, everything's off my list, yay! And I'm like, I got to share this with the business community. So that's how the idea came about. So thank you so much.
I was happy to do it. Yeah.
For spending this time with us this morning. And Debbie is also, I forgot to mention, Debbie is also one of our instructors for our workplace education programs. And we'll have another session available for new programs available in September. So also watch our newsfeed for those and on our website as well.
Good.
Any last words, Debbie?
No, just be gentle with yourself, I guess, is my closing remark. I know people have heard, or some of the feedback that I've gotten from individuals, they've shared that they sometimes feel pressured to just sort of be this amazing, altogether human being, and nobody's we're all amazing, but nobody's an altogether human being in that way. It's not about perfection. If you follow some of the things that I've been talking about in my Facebook feed since January, I was inspired by Marie Forleo's notion of progress, not perfection. And that's how I have approached this entire year. And it's been perfect during this whole COVID thing. So as long as I am moving forward, I'll close on this. My favorite quote is related to this is Alfred Montapart's, "Do not confuse motion with progress. A rocking horse is in constant motion, but it never goes anywhere." I just don't want you to be a rocking horse. Rocking horse is when you're busy, but you're just sort of going in circles and you're not making any progress. So I say, do you want to be a rocking horse or a racehorse? And I don't literally mean a racehorse. If you're just doing the slowest little trot, to me, that's a racehorse. In other words, you're just moving forward. So just try one thing and try to move forward. That's all I want you to do. But implement something, do something. Don't, they say, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting a different outcome. So if you want to feel more, if you want to be more productive and you want to improve your focus, you have to do something different. I'm offering that you just take one of these strategies and be a racehorse, not a rocking horse. Yeah, but be gentle. Progress, not perfection. Thanks, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.